Law and Batting Order. I'm your host, Tony Iliakostas. Here are some quick hits from the past 2 weeks. One of boxing's best fighters has left us too soon. On Saturday, Hector Macho Camacho passed away at the age of 50 after suffering from severe gunshot wounds to the face and head after being ambushed in a parking lot in Bayamon, Puerto Rico, earlier this week. He was declared brain dead and was living off a life support machine. Camacho was taken off life support and slowly passed away. No arrests have been made in this case. Camacho will always be remembered for his poise as a boxer and his success in the ring. And our thoughts and prayers here in Law and Batting Order go out to the Camacho family. Marlins Stadium is home to the Miami Marlins, but this past week, the venue was more like a shopping center after team owner Jeffrey Loria and his staff performed a massive fire sale. Earlier in the week, after Commissioner Bud Selig approved the trade, the Marlins traded shortstop superstar Jose Reyes, utility man Emilio Bonifacio, and pitchers Josh Johnson and Mark Burley up north to Toronto for a slew of no-name prospects. The Marlins have been under massive scrutiny after they acquired big-name players in the 2011-2012 offseason and moved to a new stadium in an attempt to become the new NL East champions. However, they finished dead last, and most of the players the Marlins once touted are in a different uniform. Hopefully this trade will shake up the tempo of the team down in Miami. Hockey fans, I'm sorry to pain you even more, but more unfortunate news have developed regarding the NHL lockout. Earlier this week, the NHL announced that all games through December would be canceled. This includes All-Star Game festivities. The way the labor talks have been going has not been very promising, and with the cancellation of more games during the season, it calls into question how effective the NHL Owners and Players Association will be to try and revive the season. The hope of many hockey fans is that this will be the last series of cancellations and that the season will commence soon. But in the meantime, we'll have to sit back and wait. Today's Order of the Court will be examining the concussion litigation between former NFL players and the NFL, as well as concussion litigation beyond the realm of the NFL. But today's episode will take a look at this litigation from a medical perspective. To help take a close look at the science of concussions, it is my privilege to introduce Dr. Andrew Blecher, who is a board-certified sports medicine physician at the Southern California Orthopedic Institute. He provides concussion management for both amateur and professional athletes, including youth sports, high school, and college, and he also has experience as a physician in the NFL, as well as for the Los Angeles X Games. So, bottom line, he's the all-around medical expert in concussion litigation and concussions, generally speaking. Dr. Blecher, welcome to the program. How's it going?
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. My pleasure. So, we've all heard the term concussion go around, especially if you're an NFL fan. If there's a player who gets hit in the head, they're out with a concussion. Can you discuss, as a doctor, what a concussion is? How does it occur? What are the common symptoms in a concussion?
Sure. A concussion is a traumatic brain injury, and it occurs when there's some type of acceleration or deceleration forces to the head. So you get hit in the head, or you could even get hit in the chest, and that can provide a whiplash type of an injury that provides forces to the head. And these forces basically cause damage to the brain. Now, the damage occurs not necessarily on a structural level, but more on a biochemical level. It sets off this cascade, biochemical cascade, metabolic cascade, that the damaged cells release things like potassium into the bloodstream, and these metabolic changes lead to symptoms. And the symptoms are widespread. Obviously, the brain controls a lot of different functions, so symptoms could be anything from visual changes to hearing changes to headache to dizziness and balance problems. Loss of consciousness is one that's commonly thought of, although loss of consciousness is not required for a concussion. Amnesia, memory problems is another common one, but the symptoms can be very widespread.
Right, yeah, exactly. So, as a medical professional, do you think a concussion is one of the most severe injuries that a person can sustain?
Well, it's definitely a severe injury. It's a traumatic brain injury. The danger with concussions is the damage is fairly silent in that you look at a concussed athlete and you don't see blood, you don't see a broken bone. It's hard to look at them and see how much damage has occurred. But the damage does occur, and not everyone notices or pays attention at first. And the damage can cause long-term disability. And, I say silent because a lot of players don't report their symptoms, not only immediately, but days and weeks and even months after. They tend to live with these symptoms on their own. They have the daily headache and the nausea and the dizziness and the memory problems, and they mostly keep it to themselves. And athletes can suffer for long periods of time and have long periods of disability that much of the public and even their own family is unaware of. And of course, we're all concerned now about the tie between concussions and head trauma and the development of CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, and the long-term effects there. So when we talk about the damage that concussion does, it does potentially lead to death, either over time due to CTE or even immediately due to second impact syndrome. When someone has sustained a concussion, hasn't recovered appropriately, and sustains a second concussion, there's a high risk of mortality with that.
Yeah, and we've definitely seen a plethora of NFL athletes, former NFL athletes, who really have been victims, unfortunately, of death because of a concussion that they suffered. Now, you have commented on a variety of blogs on the occurrence of concussions in football, one of which is on concussioninc.net, and your article titled Unringing the Bell, Lessons from the Case of Evelyn versus San Marcos Unified School District, outlines the experience that you had as a medical expert in the Scotty Evelyn case. And briefly for our viewers, that case dealt with a young boy who suffered a concussion prior to a game, and despite feeling dizzy and unstable, the coach put him back in the game, where he ultimately collapsed, and unfortunately Scotty has not recovered from his concussion. In fact, you mentioned in your article, Dr. Blecher, that Scotty requires around-the-clock care, and he can't even walk. The result of that case was a settlement around $4 million. So the next few questions will gear around that case that you had experience with. So the first question I have regarding the Scotty Evelyn case was, what was your experience like being deposed as an expert witness in the medical industry? Can you share a little information about that experience?
Sure. Serving as an expert witness is not something that we're taught in medical school. We're, as doctors, pretty unfamiliar with legal things. So it's a trial by fire, so to speak. We learn as we go. It's a little bit nerve-wracking at first, but those of us who have more experience with it, I think, we try to participate in things that we're passionate about. So being deposed as an expert witness is not generally something that's of interest to me, but in the case of dealing with sports medicine topics such as concussion, it's something that I'm very passionate about, so I do enjoy that.
Right, yeah. So what have been the challenges of serving as a medical expert, particularly in a case like the Scotty Evelyn case?
Well, in any case where you're dealing with a lot of medical jargon and various medical terminology, trying to translate that into something that someone will understand and something that will carry over to play to a jury, for example, can be a little bit difficult. We are experienced in trying to explain things to patients, but that's not necessarily the same as trying to explain things to a jury or to a lawyer. So that takes a little bit of some learning, and at times it's frustrating that you have to kind of say the same thing over and over and over again until people get what you're talking about. The answers, the medical answers in our head is always there, but trying to know how to say it or when to say it or when we maybe shouldn't even not say it at all is something that we kind of have to learn with experience.
Right, of course. Now, from a medical perspective, it's obvious that sitting out could have prevented Scotty from landing in the state that he's presently in. Basically can't really do a lot of things on his own as he normally would. But who do you really point the finger at in this case? And I'm saying this, in a common sense manner, not necessarily as a doctor, but who do you blame? Do you blame the coach? Do you blame a team doctor for not insisting the coach to keep Scotty out of the game? Who is at fault here?
Well, I think there's a little bit of fault to be spread around for everybody. In this particular case, it never went to trial, so we don't know for sure who's at fault, but at least allegedly Scotty was exhibiting symptoms that clearly were concussion related. And to put him back in a situation where he would risk further head trauma was definitely a big no-no. So how he goes from explaining his symptoms to being put back in the game, there are various hurdles to that. Number one should have been the athletic trainer who supposedly examined him and you know, basically realized that his symptoms were concussion related, and theoretically at that point, the athletic trainer should have final decision making in medical decisions and should have held him out. With every team and every situation, there's a little bit of difference in the way an athletic trainer interacts with the coach, and you know, it may have been in that situation that the athletic trainer was overridden by the coach, which shouldn't happen. So, you know, whether it's the coach's fault, whether it's the athletic trainer's fault, whether there should have been a doctor on hand at the time to override both of them, it's hard to say specifically because a lot of the things are just alleged and have not been proven. But there are certainly several hurdles that should have stopped him from going in the game that just did not occur.
Right, exactly. Now, do you think lack of education in concussion treatment is part of the reason why Scotty has ended up this way in this basic around-the-clock care state? And additionally, have other coaches both at the high school and collegiate level, have they educated themselves appropriately on the gravity of concussions?
Yeah, education is a large part of the problem. You know, most of the lay people out there not only aren't exactly sure about what a concussion is, but certainly aren't sure how to treat it. So, you know, there are some schools that are lucky enough to have athletic trainers there, but a lot of schools don't. And that oftentimes means that the coach is the one who's responsible for the protection of these athletes. And coaches do not have any training in concussions. Now, luckily, things are changing. I'm in California, and just recently a law passed in California. It was Assembly Bill 1451, I believe, that has now required high school varsity football coaches to undergo concussion training every 2 years. So hopefully they will have some understanding so they can take care of their athletes. There are also laws out there that are enabling officials and referees to pull kids out of play if they show any signs of concussion. So there's some training going on for the officials as well. So there is increasing awareness. There is increasing teaching going out there. Is it enough? No, definitely not. And this is going to be an ongoing problem. And, you know, it may really take a generation before we can get everyone who's involved with participating in sports, be it the athlete, be it the parents, be it the coaches, to really understand the gravity of the problem with concussions.
Definitely. Time will tell, of course. Now, drawing what you experienced from the Scotty Evelyn case, let's switch over to the pending NFL concussion litigation, since that's been the really the bread and butter of the concussion talk as of late. So just a quick recap for all our viewers. Numerous former NFL players, I believe the last count was around 3,000 plaintiffs, they're all claiming negligence against the NFL, and they're suing the NFL for failure to treat their concussion symptoms appropriately. Now, as a medical expert, do you think the players have a valid claim against the NFL?
Absolutely. You know, concussion management and treatment has changed significantly over the years. However, we have known for a long time that concussions do not resolve right away. You know, the $64,000 question is, how long does it take for a concussion to resolve? When is it safe to go back to play? Nobody knows the answer to this. Every concussion is different. However, we do know with certainty that concussions do not resolve in a matter of minutes. No matter what type of marker you use, what type of test you use, there are numerous studies out there that show that concussions may resolve over the course of days to weeks to months, but certainly not over the course of minutes.
Right.
So knowing that concussions don't resolve right away, we've known for a long time that it's not safe to put a player who's concussed right back into play right away or the same day, because no matter how good they may say they are feeling, we know if we've diagnosed with them with a concussion, that their problem just does not resolve that quickly. So at the high school level, at the college level, we've known for a long time these kids are not allowed to go back to play the same day, and that's the way we've practiced medicine. Now, that obviously does not occur at the NFL level. We've been returning NFL players back to play immediately after concussions, and been doing that for a long time. And the way we've justified that as physicians is their recommendations support that. If you look at the latest guidelines that came out in 2008, which were the third conference on concussion, the Zurich guidelines, They state that return to play determinations should be made at the high school and college level differently than at the NFL level. Professional athletes may be the exception to the rule that it is possible to allow them to return to play the same day. And that's based on some studies that did come out of the NFL that showed that, throughout their recent history, the NFL has not had a problem with returning athletes to play the same day and having any long-term disabilities because of it. Now, unfortunately, the studies that show that are very flawed studies, and we can spend a lot of time going into all the flaws of the studies. It's not really important, but what's important is that those studies were the basis for basically us giving excuses as to why we treated professional athletes differently. We knew in the back of our minds we probably shouldn't be treating them differently. The brain is not magically different in an NFL player than it is in a collegiate player. We know that the brain does not mature until probably age 24 or 25. So, you've got a bunch of people in the NFL running around 21, 22, 23, 24, 25-year-olds, and they should not be treated any different than our collegiate or high school athletes. But they were treated differently because they were professional athletes. They're getting paid a lot of money, and we really didn't have any data to support that we shouldn't be doing it that way.
Right.
So for a long time we did, and we returned athletes back to play the same day, even though they had been diagnosed with a concussion. So, where's their responsibility in that? What's the excuse for why we treated them differently? And, the excuse was, well, the NFL had these studies and that's just the way that we were doing it. And there was no reason to do it otherwise. So that's what we did. In retrospect, was it wrong? Yes, it was wrong. And we should have treated those athletes just the way we treat every other athlete. That if they are diagnosed with a concussion, they are held out of play that same day.
Right, exactly. Now, likewise, in the same lawsuit, the NFL players are suing Rydell, the official NFL helmet manufacturer, bringing essentially a products liability claim that the helmets failed to protect them from being concussed. Now, personally, I don't think this claim will stand solely because no matter how much padding you put in a helmet, if you make contact with your head, you're bound to get a concussion. And as a matter of fact, in one of your articles, which, by the way, for all our viewers, all of Dr. Blecher's articles will be down below in the description box. But in one of your articles, you drew a great analogy, which is that, you can shake an egg all you want without protection or not, but the yolk is bound to break. And, it's not a matter of how much protection you put on the outside of the shell. If you shake it a lot, the yolk will somehow tarnish. And basically, that the yolk is the equivalent of our brain. So, why do you think society has this misconception that more protection will lead to preventing concussions?
Again, it's just a widespread misunderstanding of what a concussion is. So helmets were developed to prevent skull fractures, and they do a good job of that. The incidence of football deaths due to skull fractures have been reduced significantly since modern helmets were utilized. But the helmet cannot prevent against a concussion as you described. And as we said earlier, it doesn't even take a hit to the head to cause a concussion. You can get a hit to the chest, which can still cause a concussion. So it doesn't matter what you put on your head, helmet or no helmet, that you can still have a concussion because of those forces that are distributed to the skull. But a lot of the lay people out there don't understand that and logically would think that more protection is better. That if you're reducing the forces that are transmitted to the skull, somehow that must reduce the forces transmitted to the brain, and it would make sense, therefore, that it can prevent concussions. And unfortunately, what makes this even more difficult is there are a lot of products out there, helmets and things that you can put on top of helmets to provide additional padding that market towards this and say that they can reduce concussions, and it just fuels the fire of the public believing that more protection is better because these companies are marketing as such, and that's probably false marketing. No one has ever actually proven that you can reduce concussions by doing this. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to rein in all these companies yet. I think eventually the lawyers will catch up with them and we'll do a better job of that. But in the meantime, it does fuel these misconceptions that more protection is better.
Right, yeah, exactly. Now, finally, as a medical professional, what do you think the future lies in store for concussion litigation, let's say 5 or 10 years down the road? Could other major sports leagues like Major League Baseball or even the National Hockey League follow the lead of the NFL and perhaps have pending concussion litigation?
Absolutely. I think the NHL is probably not far behind. The thing, however, that worries me the most is the collegiate and high school levels. The professional leagues have a lot of money behind them and they can defend against these lawsuits. But at the scholastic level, high schools don't have big budgets for these things, and it only takes a couple of big lawsuits to make a school decide that, we can't afford to have football anymore. There's way too much liability, and the same thing at the collegiate level. And I think we are going to see more and more lawsuits like the Scotty Evelyn lawsuit. We're going to see class action lawsuits like the NFL lawsuit occur at the NCAA level. And when these things occur, I think a lot of schools may have to make a decision that, maybe not afford the liability to have football. And a lot of people have worried and, predicted that potentially this whole concussion issue could be the beginning of the end of football on many levels due to the expense of the liability involved. So we'll see how that pans out. Things are changing very rapidly, but that's a big concern.
Yeah, and definitely things are changing in terms of our awareness of concussions, even the education of concussions, as you mentioned earlier. And I definitely think litigation is evolving in this sense. And who knows, maybe 10 years down the road, my casebook in my sports law class will have a full chapter on concussion litigation alone. But of course, this is great stuff. It's a hot topic. I never get bored of it. And to get it from a medical perspective is certainly very interesting. Dr. Blecher, I wish you and your family a very happy Thanksgiving. And thank you for being on Law and Batting Order.
Same to you. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Before I wrap up today's episode, I just wanted to let all of you know that the semester at my law school is winding down, which means it's time to prepare for finals. For this reason, I'll be taking a small break from Law and Batting Order until Sunday, December 23rd, which will coincidentally be the 1-year anniversary of Law and Batting Order. That should be a very exciting episode, so please mark your calendars and stay tuned for that episode. Anyway, that's the show. Leave all your comments down below, and be sure to visit Law and Batting Order at lawandbattingorder.com, as well as on Facebook and Twitter. See you in a few weeks, guys.